It's day two of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's closed-door and virtual meetings with opposition leaders ahead of the throne speech on September 23rd. Today, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh shared his party's top priorities, among them continued support for families when CERB dries up and a national pharmacare strategy. So, can the Liberals count on the New Democrats' support next week? Mr. Jagmeet Singh joins me now to discuss all this. Nice to see you, Mr. Singh, again. Welcome to Power Play. So you met with the Prime Minister today, and you gave him your sort of list of asks. I'm wondering, did you get the sense that he was actually listening to you, or was he just nodding and saying, yes, I'm doing this because I'm a minority and I've got to listen to these people?
Well, the Prime Minister was listening. I don't know if he's going to take action. And that's what I put to the Prime Minister, that I'm not as concerned about the words on paper in the throne speech. I'm more concerned about action. And so one of the tests that we're looking to see is whether or not the Prime Minister will pull back his move to cut the help that families who cannot go back to work receive. Right now, families receive $2,000, something we fought for. And now the Prime Minister is proposing to cut it by $400 down to $1,600. That is wrong. And that would be an example of the Prime Minister saying one thing and doing something else, saying that he's going to help people, but then hurting them.
But you've said repeatedly, and we've heard you in the last few weeks, that implementation is going to be more important than the words on the speech. But how can you weigh that implementation? Because you are going to listen to the speech, there's going to be a debate, and then you're going to have to vote right away. You won't have time to see how this speech will be implemented. So how do you vote for or against it if you don't have the proof in the pudding?
Well, one of the ways is that this legislation that I'm talking of, right now, the Prime Minister could propose changes to that legislation. As he's released, it's going to be $400 less for families. So families that are relying on $2,000, the Liberal government is forcing them to go ahead to be able to somehow find a way to be able to survive on $400 less. So I'm saying to the Prime Minister, one concrete way he can show that he means what he says, that it's not just words on paper, it's not just empty promises like the last throne speech. If the Prime Minister is serious, then he'll say something in the throne speech. He also has an opportunity to change that cut that he's proposing, that instead of cutting that help, he can maintain it at the $2,000. That's a concrete thing he can do right away. This throne speech is about promises down the road. But right now, we have a legislation that he has released. We are asking him to maintain the level of help to Canadians, particularly given a second wave where people will not be able to work through no fault of their own because there will be shutdowns. In the light of that, we need to see the same level of support to families who need to get through and need money in their pockets to be able to do that.
So would you be prepared, Mr. Singh, if indeed it is $1,600 and not $2,000, to vote against that speech?
Well, that would be proof to me that the Prime Minister just, again, is saying one thing but doing something else. It would be another example of the Prime Minister saying the right words, but those words being empty because they're the opposite of his actions. He's saying that he's going to put out some positive things to help people, but what he's doing right now is something that will hurt Canadians. What he's proposing right now is going to hurt Canadians and leave them worse off than before. Those who cannot work, those whose sectors are still shut down because of COVID-19. And it also means that people who are now looking at a potential second wave are afraid that they won't be able to make ends meet if there's a second lockdown. So that to me is some concrete example of this government not being committed to helping people. And I'm hoping that the Prime Minister is heeding our words, that the Liberal government hears what we're saying, and we're saying, don't say one thing and do something differently. We need you to back up your words with action. Here's a concrete proposal of showing that you mean it when you say you want to help people.
So I want to talk to you about the Premier. So the Premier said today they would like a $70 billion in healthcare support from the feds, an increase from 22 to 35% of those transfers. Now, do you think it's time for the federal government to increase that funding to healthcare?
Absolutely. Prime Minister Harper brought in massive cuts to healthcare, which hurt people. And it is part of the reason why our healthcare system has been starved of funding. On top of that, when Prime Minister Trudeau got into power, he continued those very same conservative cuts to healthcare. He continued them and did not reverse those cuts. And now premiers are saying the federal government has to pay its fair share when it comes to healthcare transfers, and it should. The cuts brought in by Prime Minister Harper, continued by Prime Minister Trudeau, was the wrong thing to do. Prime Minister Trudeau needs to, instead of going down the path of conservatives and cutting healthcare, needs to reverse those cuts and increase healthcare during a pandemic. It is very reasonable that premiers are saying we need an ally to help us properly fund healthcare, to keep it public and universal and there for families when they need it.
Jagmeet Singh, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I wish you a wonderful weekend, and we will be talking to you after that throne speech and see if indeed the Prime Minister has listened to what you asked for.
Thank you very much.